Sarah Mitchell's high heels clicked against the marble floor of the Jefferson County Courthouse. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her navy blue suit was perfectly pressed. In her arms, she carried a thick folder filled with papers she had spent weeks preparing. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in April, and only a few people were waiting in line at the court clerk's office. Sarah checked her phone one more time, looking at the photo of her 2-year-old daughter, Emma. The little girl's bright smile gave her the extra push of confidence she needed. Next, called the clerk, an older woman with gray hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Sarah stepped forward, placing her folder on the counter. "I'm here to file for child support," she said, her voice steady and sure. The clerk, Mrs. Thompson, according to her name tag, had seen thousands of these cases over her 20 years at the courthouse. "Father's name?" Mrs. Thompson asked, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. "Dr. Marcus Thompson," Sarah replied, spelling out his name. "He's a pediatrician at Children's Hope Hospital." The clerk's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of the hospital. Dr. Thompson was well known in their small city of 50,000 people. He had helped many families over the years, and his name often appeared in the local newspaper for his charitable work. Sarah pulled out a stack of papers from her folder. "I have everything here. Dates we met, photos from the night at the Blue Room Bar, and my daughter's birth certificate." Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the documents. Mrs. Thompson began entering the information into the system. The clicking of her keyboard filled the quiet office. "And when was the last time you had contact with Dr. Thompson?" she asked, following standard procedure. 3 years ago," Sarah said, her voice dropping slightly. "We met at the Blue Room when he was at a medical conference. He told me he was single." She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "When I found out I was pregnant, he had already left town. I tried calling the number he gave me, but it was disconnected." The clerk listened without expression, having heard many similar stories over the years. She continued typing, occasionally asking Sarah to clarify details: her current address, employment information, and Emma's medical history. In the waiting area, 2 other women watched with interest. They whispered to each other, recognizing Dr. Thompson's name. Sarah could feel their eyes on her back, but she kept her focus on Mrs. Thompson and the filing process. "These photos," Mrs. Thompson said, examining the printed pictures Sarah had provided. "They're from the night you met." "Yes," Sarah replied quickly. "August 15th, 3 years ago. You can see the date stamp in the corner." The photos showed a crowded bar, dim lighting, and what appeared to be a man in a dark suit talking to Sarah. The image was grainy and taken from an angle that made it difficult to see the man's face clearly. Mrs. Thompson added the photos to the growing file. "The filing fee is $215, she said. "How would you like to pay?" Sarah pulled out her credit card, her hands steady now. As she waited for the payment to process, she looked around the clerk's office. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, and motivational posters hung at regular intervals. A large clock ticked away above the door, marking each second of this life-changing moment. "Here's your copy of the filing," Mrs. Thompson said, handing Sarah a thick stack of papers. "Dr. Thompson will be served within 5 business days. The first hearing is scheduled for May 15th at 9:00 a.m. in Courtroom C. Judge Wilson will be presiding." Sarah gathered her documents, carefully placing them back in her folder. As she turned to leave, she caught sight of her reflection in the window. She looked confident, put together, exactly the image she wanted to project. But inside, her heart was racing. Walking out of the courthouse into the bright spring morning, Sarah pulled out her phone and made a call. "It's done," she said to the person on the other end. Everything went exactly as planned. A small smile played across her lips as she walked to her car, her heels still clicking against the pavement. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a story that would shock their entire community and change multiple lives forever. Dr. Marcus Thompson was finishing his rounds at Children's Hope Hospital when the court officer arrived. It was a typical Wednesday afternoon, and he had just helped a young patient overcome her fear of needles by making her laugh with his famous Donald Duck impression. "Are you Dr. Marcus Thompson?" asked the officer, a tall man in a brown uniform holding an official-looking envelope. Marcus nodded, confused by the formal tone. His white coat pocket was full of cartoon stickers he gave to his young patients, and one had fallen onto his sleeve. He quickly brushed it off, suddenly feeling the eyes of the nurses stationed on him. "You've been served," the officer said, handing him the envelope. "Please appear in court on the date listed in the documents." Marcus's hands shook as he opened the envelope right there in the hospital hallway. As he read the papers, his face went pale. The words, "Petition for Child Support," and "Sarah Mitchell," jumped out at him. But it was the next line that made his stomach drop. "In the matter of Emma Mitchell, age 2. "This has to be a mistake," he whispered to himself. He had been married to his wife Michelle for 15 years. They had met in medical school, and their relationship was rock solid. He had never even heard of Sarah Mitchell. Later that evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with Michelle. The summons papers were spread out in front of them, and Michelle was reading them for the third time. "3 years ago?" Michelle said, her voice calm but her hands gripping her coffee mug tightly. "You were at home with me, recovering from your knee surgery that whole month." Marcus ran his hands through his graying hair. "I've never been to the Blue Room bar in my life," he said. "And I've definitely never met this woman. Look at the photo she included. You can barely see the man's face." Michelle reached across the table and took his hand. "We'll fight this, Marcus. Your reputation in this community is everything. 20 years of helping children, volunteering at the free clinic, never a single complaint." Their peaceful home, usually filled with the smell of Michelle's cooking and the sound of jazz music, felt different tonight. The ticking of the kitchen clock seemed louder, and even their dog, Max, sensed the tension, lying quietly at Marcus's feet instead of begging for table scraps. Marcus's phone buzzed continuously with text messages from hospital staff who had witnessed the serving. News traveled fast in their small city. He turned the phone face down, unable to deal with the questions right now. "I should call James," Marcus said, referring to his longtime friend and lawyer. "He needs to know about this right away." Michelle nodded, already dialing the number. James answered on the second ring, and his reaction was immediate. "Don't talk to anyone about this," he advised. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. While they waited, Marcus and Michelle looked through their photos from 3 years ago. There he was, sitting on their couch with his leg propped up, watching medical documentaries during his recovery. Mitchell had documented his entire healing process, hoping to use it to encourage other patients facing similar surgeries. James arrived carrying his briefcase, his tie loosened after a long day in court. He spread the summons papers on the table and began taking notes. "This Sarah Mitchell," James said, tapping his pen on the paper. "Says here, she's a dental hygienist at Bright Smiles Dental. That's just 3 blocks from your hospital." Marcus shook his head. "I've never been there. Dr. Parker handles all my dental work, and has for the past decade." James wrote something down. "We'll need your medical records from your knee surgery, all your work schedules from that time period, and any photos or documents that prove where you were." As they talked, Michelle noticed Marcus's hands trembling slightly as he reached for his water glass. In 20 years of marriage, she had never seen him this shaken. "One more thing," James said, his voice serious. "You'll need to take a paternity test. It's standard procedure in these cases." Marcus nodded slowly. "I have nothing to hide," he said firmly. "But what about my patients? My practice? This kind of accusation?" "We'll handle it," James assured him. "But you need to be prepared. Tomorrow, this will be all over town." As if on cue, Marcus's phone lit up with a text from the hospital administrator, requesting an urgent meeting first thing in the morning. The night ahead would be long, and tomorrow would be even longer. James Carter sat in his law office late into the night, surrounded by stacks of papers. As Marcus Thompson's attorney, he had spent the last week digging deep into Sarah Mitchell's past, and what he found was troubling. Linda, he called to his assistant, who was helping him sort through court records from neighboring counties. "Look at this, 3 similar cases in the past 5 years." Linda adjusted her glasses and looked at the documents. "All child support claims?" she asked, moving closer to read the details. "Yes, and all dropped just before the court dates," James replied, spreading the papers across his desk. "First in Monroe County, then in Jefferson, and now here." The office was quiet except for the hum of computers and the occasional sound of paper shuffling. Coffee cups littered the desk. They had been at this for hours. Meanwhile, across town at Children's Hope Hospital, Marcus was finishing up his DNA test. The nurse, who had known him for 10 years, tried to keep things light as she took his cheek swab. "Don't worry, Dr. Thompson," she said kindly. "Everyone here knows your character." But the reality wasn't that simple. Earlier that day, two families had requested different doctors for their children. The hospital administrator had called Marcus into his office to discuss the situation. "It's just temporary," the administrator had said. "Until this is cleared up, we have to think about the hospital's reputation." Back at James's office, Linda burst through the door with another discovery. "I found something big," she said, holding up a file. "Sarah Mitchell's sister, Rebecca, had a baby 2 years ago." James looked up from his computer. "A baby? What's the child's name?" "Emma," Linda replied, her voice excited. "Emma Mitchell, born on the exact same date as the child Sarah claims is hers." James stood up so quickly his chair rolled back. "Get me Rebecca Mitchell's number. Now." While Linda searched for the contact information, James called Marcus with an update. It was nearly midnight, but he knew his client wouldn't be sleeping. "Marcus," James said when he answered, "we might have something. How soon can you come to my office?" 20 minutes later, Marcus and Michelle arrived. They looked tired. Neither had been sleeping well since the summons. Michelle had taken time off from her job as a hospital administrator to support her husband. James showed them what they had found. "Look at these patterns," he said, pointing to the previous cases. Each time, Sarah filed against professional men, a lawyer, a dentist, and a business owner. "But why?" Michelle asked, holding Marcus's hand tightly. "Money," James explained. In each case, she asked for significant child support payments. Most men would rather settle quietly than face public scandal. Linda returned with more information. "Rebecca Mitchell lives in Oakwood Heights," she said. "She's a single mother who works 2 jobs. And here's the interesting part. Sarah watches her niece Emma almost every day." Marcus leaned forward. "The same Emma she's claiming is my daughter?" "Exactly," James nodded. "We need to talk to Rebecca. But we have to be careful. If Sarah realizes we're onto her, she might try to run, just like she did in the other counties." The next morning, James sent his investigator to Bright Smiles Dental, where Sarah worked. The investigator, posing as a new patient, learned that Sarah had a history of erratic behavior. She had worked at 6 different dental offices in the past 5 years. Her references were good, the office manager told the investigator, but sometimes she tells strange stories about her life. We never know what's true. By afternoon, the DNA test results were rushed through, thanks to James's connections. Marcus sat in the lawyer's office, his hands shaking as he opened the envelope. "Negative," he read aloud, his voice cracking with relief. 0% probability of paternity. But James wasn't celebrating yet. "This is just the first step," he said. "We need to prove she knowingly filed a false claim. That's where Rebecca comes in." As if on cue, Linda appeared at the door. "Rebecca Mitchell is here," she said. "And she's not happy about what her sister has been doing." Marcus and Michelle exchanged looks. The truth was finally about to come out, but they knew this story was far from over. The news spread through the small city like wildfire. At Riverside Coffee Shop, the morning regulars couldn't talk about anything else. Mary, the owner for 20 years, watched as her customers huddled in groups, whispering about Dr. Thompson's case. "I heard he has other secret families," whispered Barbara, a real estate agent, stirring her coffee. "Impossible," replied Tom, a retired teacher whose grandchildren were Dr. Thompson's patients. "That man stayed late at the hospital last winter when my grandson had pneumonia. He slept in the chair next to his bed. He's not what they're saying he is." Outside Children's Hope Hospital, a local news van had been parked since morning. Reporter Lisa Chen stood in front, doing her live report. Dr. Marcus Thompson, a beloved pediatrician at Children's Hope Hospital, faces serious allegations. She spoke into the microphone. "Some parents are requesting new doctors, while others are showing strong support." Inside the hospital, the mood was tense. Nurse Jenny Williams watched as another family asked to switch doctors. She had worked with Dr. Thompson for 8 years and fought back tears as she made the change in the computer. "He saved my son's life," she told the mother who was switching. "He diagnosed a rare condition that other doctors missed. Please don't judge him before the truth comes out." At the elementary school, teachers had to remind children not to discuss the case. Little Amy Peters, whose brother was saved by Dr. Thompson last year, got into a fight defending him during recess. My brother would be dead if it wasn't for Dr. Thompson, she had yelled at a classmate who was repeating gossip heard at home. Michelle Thompson faced her own challenges at the grocery store. As she reached for a carton of milk, she heard two women talking in the next aisle. That poor woman, raising another man's child all these years, one said, not realizing Michelle could hear them. Michelle wanted to scream that it wasn't true, that they had evidence, that her husband was innocent. Instead, she left her half-filled cart and walked out, tears streaming down her face. At the local gym, Marcus tried to maintain his normal routine, but the whispers followed him everywhere. His regular workout partner of 5 years suddenly had excuses not to meet. The gym manager, however, approached him with kindness. "Doc, you saved my daughter's life when she had that allergic reaction," the manager said, patting his shoulder. "We know who you are. Don't let them drive you away." The hospital board called an emergency meeting. In the large conference room, opinions were divided. Dr. Sarah Chen, head of pediatrics, stood up to speak. "Dr. Thompson has brought millions in donations to this hospital," she said firmly. "His research on childhood asthma is saving lives across the country. Are we really going to let unproven accusations destroy his career?" But others weren't so sure. "We have to think about the hospital's image," argued Richard Brooks from the finance department. "Already our patient numbers are down 15% this week." On social media, the story took on a life of its own. Local Facebook groups were filled with debates. Some shared stories of Dr. Thompson's kindness, the times he made house calls, the Christmas he dressed as Santa for the cancer ward, the countless nights he stayed late to comfort worried parents. Others shared darker theories and rumors, each more outlandish than the last. The local police had to increase patrols near the Thompsons' house after someone threw eggs at their windows. At the free clinic where Marcus volunteered every Wednesday, the staff put up a sign, "We stand with Dr. Thompson." The waiting room was fuller than ever, with many patients coming just to show their support. By evening, Marcus sat in his home office, looking at the cards and letters that had arrived. Some were hate mail, but many more were from grateful parents and patients. One letter particularly touched him, a drawing from a 5-year-old patient showing Dr. Thompson as a superhero. "The truth will come out," Michelle said, bringing him a cup of tea. "But this town will never be the same." Marcus nodded, knowing that whatever the outcome, these accusations had already changed their community forever. The courthouse was packed on the morning of the preliminary hearing. Judge Wilson's courtroom had never been so full. Sarah Mitchell sat on one side with her attorney, wearing a conservative blue dress and clutching a tissue. Dr. Marcus Thompson sat on the other side with his wife Michelle and his lawyer, James Carter. "All rise," called the bailiff as Judge Wilson entered the courtroom. She was known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense approach. Today, her eyes scanned the crowded room with extra attention. "Before we begin," Judge Wilson announced, "I want to review some new evidence that was submitted this morning." She held up a thick folder with red markings. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her attorney, Mr. Reed, looked confused. He hadn't submitted any new evidence. James Carter stood up. "Your Honor, we have Rebecca Mitchell in the courtroom today. She's the sister of the plaintiff, Sarah Mitchell." The judge nodded. "Ms. Rebecca Mitchell, please approach the bench." A young woman walked forward, holding a sleeping toddler with curly hair. The little girl was wearing a pink dress with white shoes. Sarah's face went pale at the sight of them. "Ms. Mitchell," the judge began, "is this your daughter, Emma?" "Yes, Your Honor," Rebecca replied clearly. "She was born on March 15th, 2 years ago at Memorial Hospital. I have her birth certificate right here." The courtroom burst into whispers. Judge Wilson banged her gavel for silence. "And Ms. Mitchell, can you tell the court about your sister's relationship with your daughter?" Rebecca took a deep breath. "Sarah watches Emma when I work my night shift at the diner. She's always been obsessed with Emma, buying her expensive clothes, telling people Emma is her daughter. I thought it was just talk, until I found out about this court case." Sarah stood up suddenly. "She's lying. Emma is my daughter." "Sit down, Ms. Mitchell," Judge Wilson ordered sharply. She turned to James Carter. "Counsel, you have more evidence." James pulled out several documents. "Yes, Your Honor. We have medical records showing that Sarah Mitchell has never given birth. We also have evidence of 3 similar false claims she filed in other counties. The judge examined the medical records carefully. Her expression grew more serious with each page she read. Furthermore, James continued, we have Dr. Thompson's medical records showing he was recovering from knee surgery during the time Ms. Mitchell claims they met. He never left his house that entire month. Sarah's attorney looked stunned. He turned to his client, whispering urgently, but Sarah wasn't listening. She was staring at Emma, tears running down her face. Your Honor, James said, we also have the DNA test results showing 0 probability of Dr. Thompson being Emma's father. Judge Wilson raised her hand to stop him. Mr. Reed, she addressed Sarah's attorney, did you verify any of your client's claims before filing this lawsuit? Mr. Reed stood up, his face red. Your Honor, I was given what appeared to be valid documentation. If I was misled. You were played for a fool. Judge Wilson interrupted. She turned to Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, stand up. Sarah stood slowly, her legs shaking. I am dismissing this case with prejudice, Judge Wilson declared. Furthermore, I am referring you for criminal prosecution for filing false claims and perjury. Bailiff, please take Ms. Mitchell into custody. As the bailiff approached, Sarah broke down. I just wanted a family, she cried. Emma should have been mine. I take better care of her than Rebecca does. Rebecca hugged Emma tighter as her sister was led away in handcuffs. The little girl woke up, confused by the noise and commotion. Dr. Thompson sat in shocked silence as Michelle squeezed his hand. Tears of relief ran down his face as years of building a good reputation were finally vindicated. Judge Wilson had one final statement. Dr. Thompson, the court sincerely apologizes for the distress this has caused you and your family. Your reputation in this community speaks for itself. As people began leaving the courtroom, many stopped to shake Marcus's hand or pat his shoulder. The nightmare was finally over, but the story of what happened in that courtroom would be told in their small city for years to come. Sarah Mitchell sat in the county jail's interview room, wearing an orange jumpsuit. Detective Lisa Martinez sat across from her, a thick file open on the metal table between them. The room was cold, and Sarah's hands shook as she wrapped them around a paper cup of water. Let's start from the beginning, Detective Martinez said gently. We need to understand why you did this. Sarah looked at the gray walls, then down at her hands. I lost my baby 5 years ago, she whispered. I was 7 months pregnant. The doctors said it was a girl. The detective wrote in her notebook as Sarah continued to speak. The story that emerged was sadder than anyone had expected. After I lost the baby, I couldn't handle it, Sarah explained, wiping tears with her sleeve. I saw my sister Rebecca with Emma, and something in my mind just broke. I started believing Emma was the baby I lost. Meanwhile, at the district attorney's office, James Carter met with the prosecutor, David Chen. They reviewed Sarah's previous cases from other counties. 3 other men, David said, shaking his head as he spread out the files. A lawyer named Michael Brooks, dentist Robert Garcia, and business owner James Wilson. All successful men, all African American, just like Dr. Thompson. She targeted them specifically. James asked, leaning forward. Yes, David replied. She knew they would want to avoid publicity. 2 of them paid her to drop the cases. The 3rd moved away before the court date. Back at the jail, Detective Martinez was showing Sarah photos of her previous victims. Why these particular men, she asked. Sarah's voice was barely audible. They reminded me of Emma's real father. He was a medical student, African American. He died in a car accident before I could tell them about the pregnancy. After I lost the baby, I started seeing him everywhere. At Children's Hope Hospital, Dr. Thompson was meeting with the hospital board. The room was packed with staff members who had come to support him. The truth is out, the hospital administrator announced. Dr. Thompson has been completely cleared, but more than that, this incident has shown us how much he means to our community. The staff burst into applause. Nurse Jenny wiped tears from her eyes as she stood up to speak. The parents who requested different doctors are all calling to switch back, she reported. They're apologizing for doubting you. Later that afternoon, Rebecca Mitchell visited Sarah in jail. She brought photos of Emma, but didn't bring the child. Sarah sat across from her sister, looking much older than her 32 years. I'm so sorry, Sarah sobbed. I need help. I know that now. Rebecca reached across the table and took her sister's hand. The court psychiatrist says you've been suffering from severe trauma and delusions. They're going to get you the help you need. At the courthouse, Judge Wilson met with the district attorney. They discussed Sarah's case and the broader implications. We need better systems in place, the judge said firmly. These false claims didn't just hurt Dr. Thompson, they hurt every real parent seeking child support, every real child who needs help. The district attorney nodded. We're implementing new verification procedures. No more cases will go forward without thorough background checks. That evening, Marcus and Michelle Thompson sat in their backyard, finally able to relax. The wind chimes tinkled softly, and their dog Max played in the grass. The hospital wants me to head a new program, Marcus said, holding Michelle's hand, supporting parents who've lost children. Sarah's story made me realize how many people are suffering silently. Michelle smiled proudly. Even after everything she put you through, you still want to help. Her actions were wrong, Marcus replied, watching the sunset. But her pain was real. Maybe some good can come from this whole mess. Inside the jail, Sarah sat on her bed, holding the photos Rebecca had brought. A court-appointed psychiatrist would be starting her treatment tomorrow. For the first time in years, she would have to face the truth about her lost baby and begin the long journey toward healing. The story that had shocked their community was ending, but its effects would ripple outward for years to come, changing policies, healing old wounds, and reminding everyone that truth, no matter how painful, must always come to light. 3 months after the courthouse revelation, life in the small city had changed in unexpected ways. Dr. Marcus Thompson stood at the podium in the hospital's main conference room, addressing a packed audience of medical professionals and community members. Today, we're launching the Hope and Healing Center, he announced, his voice strong and clear. A place where parents who have lost children can find support, counseling, and understanding. In the front row, Michelle wiped away tears as she watched her husband. Next to her sat Rebecca Mitchell, who had become an unexpected ally in their mission to help others. Her daughter Emma, now a lively toddler, played quietly with a stuffed bear Dr. Thompson had given her. After the ceremony, Marcus met with his first group of parents. Among them was Janet Lewis, who had initially requested a different doctor for her children during the scandal. "I'm so sorry I doubted you," Janet said, holding Marcus's hand tightly. "But what you're doing now, helping people like Sarah before they break, it's amazing." At the county jail, Sarah Mitchell was preparing for transfer to a mental health facility. Her cell was clean and organized, with pictures of her lost baby carefully stored in an envelope. Dr. Karen Phillips, her psychiatrist, sat with her during the final evaluation. "You've made progress, Sarah," Dr. Phillips said kindly. "Accepting the truth about your loss was the first step. At the new facility, we'll help you build a healthy future." Sarah nodded, looking different from the angry, confused woman who had been arrested. Her eyes were clearer now, her hands steady. "I wrote letters," she said softly, "to Dr. Thompson and the other men I hurt. Will you make sure they get them?" Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Judge Wilson was meeting with officials from neighboring counties. The case had exposed serious flaws in their legal system, and changes were happening fast. Every child support claim now requires thorough verification before filing, explained Court Administrator Peter Garcia. "We've already stopped 3 false claims in the past month alone." James Carter's law firm had also grown. He now had a special division dedicated to helping falsely accused parents clear their names. His office walls were covered with thank you letters from families he had helped. Dr. Thompson's case opened our eyes, he told a reporter from the local newspaper. "These false accusations don't just hurt the accused. They hurt real children who really need support." At Children's Hope Hospital, things had changed too. The pediatric ward now had a wall called Thompson's Heroes, featuring photos of children whose lives Dr. Thompson had saved over his 20 years of practice. Nurse Jenny was showing the new family the wall. "See this little girl?" She pointed to a photo. "Dr. Thompson stayed with her for 36 hours straight during a crisis. That's who he really is." Rebecca Mitchell had started a support group for single parents, inspired by her own experiences and her sister's tragedy. Every Wednesday evening, parents gathered to share their struggles and victories. "My sister's actions were wrong," Rebecca told the group. "But her pain was real. We all need support sometimes. We all meet people who understand. Late one evening, Marcus sat in his home office, reading Sarah's letter. Michelle brought him his favorite tea and sat nearby, offering silent support as she had throughout the ordeal. She named her baby Grace, Marcus said quietly, looking up from the letter. The one she lost. She never gave herself time to grieve properly. Never got help until now. Michelle touched his hand. And that's why the Hope and Healing Center is so important. Outside their window, fireflies danced in the early summer evening. Their dog Max chased them playfully, unaware of how his family's life had changed and grown in unexpected ways. The scandal that had threatened to destroy Dr. Thompson's career had instead led to healing, not just for Sarah, but for their entire community. New safeguards protected the innocent, new programs helped the hurting, and new understanding bridged old divides. As Marcus finished reading the letter, he realized that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest changes. Tomorrow, he would go back to saving children's lives, but now with an even deeper understanding of how to heal not just bodies, but hearts as well. 1 year had passed since the dramatic courthouse revelation. On a bright Sunday morning, Dr. Marcus Thompson stood in the garden of the Hope and Healing Center, watching families gather for their annual Celebration of Life event. The center had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a small support group now helped hundreds of families dealing with loss, false accusations, and emotional trauma. The beautiful brick building, once an abandoned community center, now buzzed with activity and hope. Dr. Thompson called out a familiar voice. Sarah Mitchell, wearing a volunteer badge, was helping set up chairs for the morning ceremony. After 6 months of intensive therapy and rehabilitation, she had been released and was now working to help others heal. Marcus nodded at her, still amazed by the change. The angry, troubled woman who had once tried to destroy his life was now one of the center's most dedicated volunteers. She specialized in helping women who had lost babies, turning her own painful experience into a source of healing for others. The new mothers group is starting next week, Sarah told him, her eyes clear and focused. 5 women have already signed up. Nearby, Michelle Thompson was organizing the refreshment table with Rebecca Mitchell. Emma, now 3 years old, helped by carefully placing cookies on plates. The little girl who had unknowingly been at the center of the scandal was now the unofficial mascot of the healing center. Auntie Sarah, Emma called out, waving a cookie. Sarah smiled and waved back, but kept her distance, one of the healthy boundaries she had learned to maintain during her recovery. James Carter arrived with his family, carrying a large banner that read, "Hope Heals All." His law firm had successfully helped 20 other falsely accused parents in the past year, and he had become a national speaker on the topic of false claims and legal reform. The governor signed the new law yesterday, he told Marcus excitedly. Every state court will now use our verification system. We're calling it the Thompson Protocol. Judge Wilson, who had recently been promoted to the state Supreme Court, walked through the garden admiring the memorial flowers planted by parents who had lost children. Her tough but compassionate handling of Sarah's case had set new standards for similar situations across the country. Your program is changing lives, Dr. Thompson, she said, stopping to smell a white rose. Not just here, but everywhere. 5 other cities have started similar centers. The morning ceremony began with a speech from Rebecca, who had become the center's family coordinator. A year ago, we were a community divided by scandal and suspicion, she said. Today, we're a community united by understanding and healing. As Rebecca spoke, Marcus looked around at the faces in the crowd. There was Janet Lewis, who adopted him during the scandal, now running the center's childcare program. Nurse Jenny from the hospital sat with some of his former patients, including little Amy Peters, whose brother he had saved years ago. Even Mr. Reed, Sarah's former attorney, had found redemption. After the case, he had completely changed his practice, now specializing in helping reunite families and protect children's rights. The ceremony reached its emotional peak when Sarah stepped up to speak. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was strong. A year ago, I was lost in grief and delusion, she said. I hurt good people because I couldn't face my own pain. But through the kindness of those I hurt most, Dr. Thompson, his wife, my sister, I found my way back. Today, I want to announce that we're opening a special wing for grief counseling. We're naming it Grace's Garden, in memory of all the children we've lost. Marcus squeezed Michelle's hand as they listened. Their nightmare had transformed into something beautiful, a place of healing, understanding, and second chances. After the ceremony, as families mingled and shared stories, Marcus watched Emma play with other children in the garden. The truth that had shocked their community had led to changes nobody could have predicted. Ready to head home? Michelle asked, wrapping her arm around his waist. Marcus smiled, looking at the center one last time. You know what? We are home. Right here, helping people heal. This is exactly where we're supposed to be. And in the warm sunshine of that Sunday morning, surrounded by the community that had grown stronger through adversity, Marcus knew that sometimes the most painful truths could lead to the most beautiful endings.